Welcome to the Backyard Professor live show tonight, Sunday night. What is the date tonight? January 21st. 3 weeks of your new year shot to heck. And what have we accomplished? We've accomplished a lot, and we'll show you tonight. Let's get this show on the road. Okay, thanks for coming out tonight. We've got to close out now. It's been good to see you. Anybody volunteer for the closing prayer? Oh, wait, I'm backwards.
You know, I always wanted to just like walk up on a fast Sunday and say the closing prayer during testimony meeting.
It's like when I gave a sacrament meeting talk one year. Got up there and I go, yeah, brothers and sisters, I'm so grateful to be here. I have studied hard to give you the absolute most beautiful sacrament meeting talk I know how to, and I've worked very hard on it. And it's on procrastination, but I'll do it later. And I turn around and sat down. And to this day, every now and then, someone from the old ward sees me and he goes, procrastinator! That was the most electrifying talk the entire crowd ever heard. And they all came up to me afterward laughing and patting me on the back. And they said, only you would have the guts to do something like that. Well, you know, make it an object lesson. Let's see who's here tonight, Benny. I've got Benny Hinrich with me again, and we're going to do part 2 of this phenomenal idea that Benny has worked his butt off researching. I mean, the stuff he's found is incredible. He's in the process of translating some of the classics back into their Latin, and he's studying Greek. And I mean, he is a fabulous musician.
I have a new song coming out on Friday. Maybe I'll post a comment on the YouTube video after or something with a link.
Oh, that would be awesome. And he put me to shame in karaoke last year at the Thrive. That's where we met. We've been good friends ever since. Let's say hi to everybody. Benny, JC, Alan Zabriskie, Peter Higgs. Good to see y'all. Tim Rathbone and JC. Newton Lemos, Doug Vincent. Good to see you. Songs of Our Own. Don Smith, how are you, dear? Mo, see ya. Good to see ya. Rio for Life, Kim D. Well, I'm very glad you've caught this live because this is going to be a whopper, man. Benny has some incredible information, so we're grateful you're here. Good to see y'all. Looks like quite a few people. Wanda Anthony, good to see you. Don Smith, always good to see you. Debbie Donovan. Yes, this is going to be a deep dive on this topic, Debbie. So glad you're here. Dan Vogel, he is here. Everyone is present and accounted for except for the BYP and Benny. I don't know where they went, but they're hanging out somewhere. We're no longer behind the stage. We have to act proper and appropriate, Benny. So, you know, put your best shoe forward. And... Okay, so
I see a person asking what kind of songs I write. I kind of genre hop a little. So the one I'm about to put out is electro funk, kind of disco-y. And the last one I put out was country, and I put out a punk rock song before that. And I have a funk tune and like soul ballads and
Moksha Raver. Welcome.
Got a lot.
Also. Yeah. I have been with Benny when he's got his keyboard there and he can just sit down. Hey, listen to this. Like I'm going to make one up in my head. I mean, he puts Elton John to shame. He is such a good pianist. So I hope I don't embarrass you, but I mean, you play what, 39 musical instruments?
Yeah, well, just 38. We're getting close.
38. Okay, sorry. I didn't mean to make your head swell. Yeah, Benny is a true inspiration when it comes to music. Yeah, Newton Lemo says, wow, send us the links to your music. Yeah. You do have a page sharing your music, don't you?
Yeah, I'll put a comment on the YouTube video after.
Okay, yeah, please do. Please do. It looks like there's quite a few people interested. Patty Cake,
And
welcome.
And if we're going to do other creative announcements, I just finished recording the audiobook for my next book. I also write fantasy. So
yes,
that is
good. Put that link in too, would you? Please.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. See, let no one say the backyard professor just goofs off. I get incredible guests and then I goof off. Benny and I, it's funny how we met because your friend came up to me in the motel lobby there in St. George and grabbed me and kind of tapped me on the arm and said, hey, backyard professor, how you doing? Oh, good. And he said, hey, I have someone I want you to meet. See that guy right over there? And he starts pointing over there. And yeah, he goes, you want him on your show? I said, really? What for? He goes, go talk to him. He's got something. And I'll be go to heck if you didn't just blow me away. What was it that we actually did?
Hebrew in the Book of Ether, and then comparing it with Akkadian, which was
that's right. You were actually here in my basement when we did that, weren't you? Yeah. We got together in town, and that was fun. Yeah,
everybody needs a scholastic wingman.
That's correct.
I should have done the one where I walk up and I'm like, hey, that girl over there thinks you're cute. And then I like run over and stand in the door and lean on it.
Oh my. Okay, then. Well, I got to watch you every moment, don't I? So why don't we do our brief recap is basically last time, 2 weeks ago, we showed some very interesting parallels between some of the classic Greeks and some of their themes and ideas, and showed that pretty much some of them almost word for word came from or ended up in the Hebrew Bible. And we know, we can speculate within a certain amount of reason, when really the Hebrew Bible, not just translated and compiled, but when it spread, and by the time that it got into people's hands and the various copies were extensive enough and all, it was beginning to be shown that there were enormous Greek influences, and we weren't able to finish that list of parallels. We're going to tonight for the audience. Hey, Radio Free Mormon, guten Abend, mein Freund. Good to see you. We're going to finish off those parallels. Benny's got a few more that he wants to share. And then we get into the juicy stuff the parallels are really good. They're juicy, all right. But the history is what is just so fascinating. And that's the cream of the crop. So we're going to get through these parallels fairly quick tonight. I'm just going to kind of sit back and let Benny do his thing real quick, and he'll just highlight them. And we've got the slides to show you, and then we'll jump deep into the meat of the discussion for the next 4 or 5 hours, because there's a lot. Okay, I'm exaggerating. I meant 3. So, Benny is such that he has enough information. We could go for days, and someday we might try a marathon, Benny. That'd be kind of fun. Maybe. Who knows? Anyway.
Some people can do a marathon in 2 hours. So.
Right? Very good. See, I told you this guy was skilled. So, okay, let's get going. I'm going to turn the mic and time over to you, my friend, until we get through these. And if I do have any questions, I'll try to ask them and make sure they're intelligent. Yeah, Moksha Raver has a good point. Carrie will be a fantasy author as well, better than Joseph Smith. Oh, yeah, my story is going to blow you away. Whatever. Benny is the fantasy author. He's written several. How many books you have out?
I have 4 that are released, and
Man,
another one coming
me out of the
soon.
water. Another one coming soon. So that's number 5. So we're all behind in our reading. We got to get with it. So let's do us proud. And every one of you go order his books and listen to them and read them. And that way, next time I have him on here, we can praise him with ululations of joy. All right, let's see. What else have you got as far as parallels? Here we go, Benny.
Beautiful. Yeah, so there's a few more slides of parallels, and then we're going to jump into, so why do we think, after all these parallels have been laid out, why do we think that the direction of influence is from Greek to Hebrew rather than the other way around? So to begin, we're going to talk about Ahab. You may or may not remember Ahab. He was a king, but
he was in the novel Moby Dick, wasn't he?
He sure was, right alongside Ishmael, the abandoned child that was found. But so Agamemnon, obviously, very, very big character from the Iliad. He's like the main king, but he's working amongst a coalition of kings. And so in this story, the Iliad, Zeus sends a deceptive dream to Agamemnon to sack Troy the next day with his allies. Agamemnon argues with his prophet Calchas, who says that his abusive treatment of Apollo's prophets have called wrath. Agamemnon says, always the evil things are dear to your heart to prophesy. He's just complaining about Calchas, just always prophesying bad things about him. Then Agamemnon is like, we're going to do this attack anyway. And the next day he does it, and they suffer an embarrassing defeat at Troy, during which he is wounded in his chariot. And then later, when he gets home, he is killed by his wife, Clytemnestra. And so we have King Ahab. I'm trying to remember. I believe he was an Israelite king, not a Judahite king. So he's from the north. I think he's from the Omride dynasty, so one of the descendants of Omri. And his wife is Jezebel, who that is a name that is probably, stuck in your ear before. So in this story, Ahab, who I believe is the king of Israel, he's partnered with the king of Judah. So he has a coalition of kings, and they want to go to battle. I think it's against Moab, but it might be the Assyrians. I can't remember. Anyway, all of the prophets predict victory. Because these dudes would employ like a contingent of prophets in their court, and
they were like today's politicians with all of these special interests.
Yeah, basically. But the ally king of Judah, who I think was Jehoshaphat, but don't quote me on that. He's like, wait, can we like get a second opinion on this? And Ahab says, he's like, well, there's one other prophet, but he never prophesies.
We need to do that with President Nelson next time he tries to make a prophecy. Hey, can we get a second opinion? Sorry, I couldn't help it.
But he never prophesies good for me. Never anything but evil. And then the prophet, who's Micaiah, comes and he tells Ahab that he had a dream where Yahweh was sitting there amongst the council of the gods, all of his children and whatever. And he's like, he was looking for somebody to go and deceive the prophets. And a spirit comes up and says, I'll go be a lying spirit in the mouth of Ahab's prophets to deceive him into going into battle. And then this kind of reminded me of Ezekiel 9:9, which says, and if a prophet is deceived into giving a message, it is because I, the Lord, have deceived that prophet. I will lift my fist against such prophets and cut them off from the community of Israel. So,
wow, pretty good parallel.
And then Ahab, during this battle, is killed in his chariot, trying to take Ramoth Gilead. And then he has an aggressive wife, Jezebel. So to put these side by side, each king, Ahab and Agamemnon, contemplates trying to take a city. Each king leads a coalition of forces against another coalition. Detailed deliberations and discussion precede his going into battle. Jehoshaphat serves a similar function as Agamemnon's Nestor. Each king receives a report of divine will, ensuring a positive outcome of the battle. Each main god converses with a lesser divine being. Zeus instructs the dream, but the spirit, the lying spirit, volunteers for Yahweh in corresponding terms to fool the respective kings into thinking they will sack their respective cities that day. The audience, however, gets some dramatic irony. They know the reports to be false, to be spurious. Each king proceeds and fails on the basis of the false report of divine support. Each king is wounded in his chariot, and each king has an aggressive wife.
Interesting.
And, we talked about monofitting last time, which is where you take a polytheistic story and try to fit it onto monotheism. And sometimes you end up with these kind of jagged edges that don't get sanded off. So, Zeus or Athena sending a dream is common for Greek epics, but Yahweh sending a deceiving spirit is not super common. When Agamemnon loses Zeus's support, still retaining that of Hera, Poseidon, and Athena, it's not as tragic in a polytheistic system as Ahab losing Yahweh's support. Micaiah is present at the Council of Gods, which is portrayed as one god plus spirits. So it's like morphing it from, we have like all these different gods who have different passions and different interests competing against each other and, working against each other's interests, to, hey, we have one god and he's both like deceiving the prophets and he's also telling a different prophet, the truth. And, it's
that is interesting. Yeah.
It's less coherent.
Yeah.
Now let's look at Saul plus Agamemnon, perhaps some different aspects of Agamemnon. It has long been noticed that Saul and David have a lot of parallels to Agamemnon and Achilles from the Iliad. Agamemnon nervously watches Achilles rise in popularity. He distributes war spoils in a selfish, arbitrary manner. The prophet Calchas serves as a nemesis. He loses the favor of Zeus to Achilles. Zeus sends him a deceptive dream. And Saul nervously watches David's rise in popularity. Saul violates the ban against the Amalekites and keeps spoils for himself. He also erects a monument to himself. And this could perhaps be an example of being overcome with kleos, or fame, like an Iliadic hero. He often butts heads with the prophet Samuel. He loses the favor of Yahweh to David, and Yahweh repeatedly vexes him with an evil spirit. I think
interesting.
You even get a scene where he has David come play his harp because he's like, Yahweh's been vexing me with evil spirits.
He does, actually. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting how the story follows the same plot, isn't it?
Very much.
Well, Achilles is the ancient Reacher that we have now on our TV with Alan Ritchson. I don't know if you've watched that series or not, but he is big and bad.
Yeah, so Achilles, obviously, Achilleus from the Iliad, has a lot of parallels to David. So Achilles, after quarreling with Agamemnon, Achilles stops fighting for the Greeks, rendering aid to the Trojans. He plays the lyre during the larger conflict with Agamemnon, when Agamemnon sends an embassy to ameliorate relations between them. He fights and wins the biggest duel of the book against Hector. And then David, after Saul threatens him, David fights for the Philistines, which are considered by scholars to be the Mycenaean Greeks. He plays the lyre during the larger conflict with Saul. Oh, look right here. Saul gets evil spirits from Yahweh, so David plays to calm him. He fights and wins the biggest duel of the book against Goliath, and epic songs are sung about him. And there's a couple different times where people are like singing epic songs about David killing like 10,000 or something like that. I don't know if you remember that reference. Then we do have a little bit of David and Agamemnon. One of the main points of conflict between Achilles and Agamemnon is that Agamemnon takes Achilles' concubine. Achilles refuses to fight for the Achaeans, which leads to heavy losses. David's hamartia is killing Uriah and taking his wife, which leads to no small measure of consequences for David. And as it says at the bottom of the slide, this one is like my idea. So yeah, I don't know, just throwing it out there.
I'm not going to take it with a grain of salt. I'm going to take it with a pinch of pepper and enjoy the flavor. No, that's good. That's interesting. Good insights.
But staying on that line about David, obviously Uriah the Hittite is the one that David has killed. And we have a character from Greek mythology called Bellerophon. And so in the story of Bellerophon, Antea, who's the wife of a king named Proetus, tries to sleep with Bellerophon, but he refuses due to his honor. She lies to her husband and says Bellerophon tried to rape her, says he must kill Bellerophon. Proetus sends him to another king carrying a letter with his own death sentence. The king of Lycia sends him to fight the Chimera, Selime, the Amazons, and in ambush. He just keeps trying to kill this dude. Bellerophon bests all of these and is granted royal honors. And then obviously, very famous story, David impregnates Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah. He tries to get Uriah to sleep with her, but Uriah sleeps outside to honor his men. You know, it's like drunk Uriah has more honor than sober David. His men who are sleeping on the battlefield. David sends Uriah back to the battlefront to the commander Joab, carrying a letter with his own death sentence. Uriah is pitted against the strongest enemies. He's put at the front and dies. Yep. This was an interesting paper that I found about the arming of Goliath. So both David and Goliath.
Yadin, I wonder if he's related to Yadin. Is that his son or nephew or someone or brother?
Haven't the
Yadin is idea. A rare name in scholarship. So Yadin was the great Dead Sea Scroll Jewish scholar back when the scrolls were first discovered and translated. Interesting.
Oh. Might have to look into that. Yeah, so both David and Goliath have arming scenes described, as happens before the 3 heroic duels in the Iliad. And a duel in Greek is also called monomachy. Mono meaning one and maki meaning like battle. And monomachy is not really found in Near Eastern traditions. Goliath.
I'd never thought of that. That's interesting.
So think about the Bible.
Not, is it? Yeah.
Just think about the Bible. How many duels come to your brain when you think about the Bible?
Yeah, none. Well, I mean, David and Goliath.
Yeah, except for David and Goliath, it's basically none. I mean, in Judges, you have some dude trying to, I think it's Abimelech or something, trying to attack a town, and a lady chucks like a rock at his head and it splits open.
And then he had his sword bearer say, "No, run me through with the sword. This would be a shame to."
So I mean, that's a fight between 2 people, so to say, but not really. So there just aren't really duels. Goliath has a helmet, a breastplate of scales, greaves, javelin, and a large shield requiring a bearer. All of these are common in Homer, but not common in the Bible. The words greaves, spearhead, and mail armor are only used once in the Bible, right here in the arming of Goliath. And shield bearers do not appear elsewhere in the Bible. He is called the man in between, which is also a word that's only used once. And the scholarly term for that is hapax legomenon. Means said once. Hapax means once in Greek.
Said once, yeah.
So yeah, he's called the man in between in the Bible, which is very possibly a translation of the Greek meta ichmio, and that means the space between two armies. So this is an interesting linguistic parallel. So in Proverbs 31:27, Proverbs 31:10 starts, and it's like a praise to the woman of valor. So kind of cool. Not like praises to women are actually not seen in a ton of other ancient wisdom literature, like Egyptian and Sumerian and so forth. And but in Proverbs we do. I mean, you do get the ones that are like, having a mean woman in your house is the worst thing that could ever happen. But you do get passages like this as well, which do kind of give women some kudos. But anyway, so this verse starts and it says, Sophia halikot beta. She watches over the ways of her household. But this word Sophia, so the normal form is sopa. And this is, so Sophia is like an alternative form. And it's the only time the singular feminine participle Sophia is used in the Bible.
Really?
Sophia in Greek means wisdom. And
Right.
so like they went out of their way to use this less common form of the words to get this pun, this bilingual pun that says Sophia are the ways of her household, meaning, wisdom are the ways of her household. And also that's where you, from the Greek, and she watches over the ways of her household in Hebrew. And that literally just doesn't work unless you know Greek.
Well, it's a good thing we all know Greek.
Okay, so this is a long one, but very cool. Isaac and Phrixus. So there's a dude named King Athamax, and he has two children, Phrixus and Hele. And he doesn't like their mom, so he gets remarried. His new wife plots to have them killed. She gets messengers to tell the king that the oracle at Delphi, speaking for Apollo, says the famine will end if he sacrifices Phrixus on Mount Lephistion. As he's about to sacrifice his son, Zeus/Nephili, kind of depends on the story, sends a golden ram to rescue the children and fly away to Colchis, which is modern-day Georgia. Phrixus gets to Colchis and he sacrifices the ram and hangs its fleece in an oak tree. Side note, his sister Hele falls off the ram while it's flying into the ocean and dies. But
no, it's always the poor woman.
Yeah, that's why they call it that particular one, like the Sea of Hele or whatever, Hellespont.
Yeah, the Hellespont.
So in Abraham and Isaac, Abraham is commanded to sacrifice his son Isaac. They ascend Mount Moriah. An angel stops Abraham before the sacrifice can occur, and then they find a ram caught by its horns in the brush and sacrifice it. So if we look at the parallels here, we have a divine command to sacrifice a son. The father quickly submits to the demand. Sacrifice is to happen on a mountain. There is last-minute divine deliverance. They have a ram stuck in a tree or bush, and the ram is sacrificed, which is, that's kind of textured, like that's intense. But so in Greek, the stepmother, once again, we're monophyting, poly to monotheism. The stepmother, right, Ino, bribes the oracles of Apollo to convince the king to sacrifice his son, and Zeus, or the mother Nephile, sends the ram of salvation.
So the Greeks had a ram of salvation too, huh?
Yes.
How
yes.
Interesting. Well, I mean, we've been raised to think that this whole idea of the ram or the sheep or whatever was uniquely Jewish and then Christian, with Jesus, the only begotten Lamb, and all that. Yeah, but that's not necessarily so, is it?
Yeah. And in Hebrew, both the imprimatur for Abraham to kill his son and the injunction against Abraham killing his son, along with the ram of salvation, are sent by the same God, Elohim. The story comes across as a cumbersome adaptation of a tale where there are a palette of different hued gods the storyteller can dip his brush in to contrast against each other, where the Hebrew God has no foil but himself.
There's the friction. Yeah.
Yeah,
Interesting.
so I mean, and I'm sure believers will say that the monotheistic one works better because of X, Y, and Z, but I'm just pointing out that there is this reading where it seems like a more awkward fitting of a polytheistic story into monotheism.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
But continuing with Isaac and Phrixus, so later we get Jason and the Argonauts, and they
One
are
of the
from
coolest stories in ancient literature.
absolutely. They are from the same tribe as Phrixus, and basically Zeus is still pissed off, and so Jason and the Argonauts, they embark to fetch the golden fleece to appease Zeus's wrath over the attempted sacrifice of Phrixus. And while they're journeying on their boat, Triton, who I think is the son of Poseidon, appears and gives Euphemus, who is one of the sailors, one of the men of Argos, a handful of Libyan soil as a promise that his descendants would return and colonize the land of Cyrene. It would have happened 4 generations later. That's like what the promise was. But the soil was washed overboard and landed on the island Thera instead.
Oh, man.
I know, happens every time. The descendants of the Argonauts would have to first colonize Thera before making it to Cyrene. And this is the reverse order of Abraham. Abraham is promised a land for his seed to inherit. Then the sacrifice of his son ensues. Phrixus was almost sacrificed. Then the Argonauts seek the golden fleece to make amends and are promised a land for their seed to inherit. Both groups have to stop for generations in another land before reaching their final promised land.
Ooh, that's a good case of mimesis in the Old Testament. Yeah.
Yeah, and it gets even more crazy. Generations after the descendants had settled on Thera, the Delphic oracle commanded one of them to lead the people to Cyrene. The man was known as Bottus, which means stutterer, and argued against it because of his speech impediment. The oracle told him to do it anyway, and then Bottus ends up ruling Cyrene for 40 years.
So when you cite Pindar there in the 4th Pythian Ode, 500 BC, and Apollonius Rhodes, Argonautica, 250 BC, both of those sources have this. So this story passed down from generation to generation for hundreds of years. Is that the implication there?
Well, that's part of it. The other implication is just trying to like put a pin in like the timing.
Ah.
Just like, okay, this story was known to the Greeks by 500 BC.
All right.
And so I don't think I have, I don't have another slide explaining the parallels, but for those of you familiar with the Exodus story,
never heard of it.
The descendants of Abraham and Isaac, they're promised the land of Canaan, but first they have a sidetrack in Egypt for 400 years.
Yep.
And then one of them, Moses, he gets called by God to lead the people out and make it to the promised land. For the Argonauts and their descendants, it was Cyrene. But for Abraham and his descendants, it was Canaan. And Moses was like, I can't because I'm bad at speaking. Like I stutter when I speak. And then Yahweh is like, well, you're going to do it anyway, but we're going to have your brother Aaron be the speaker. And then Moses rules over the Israelites for 40 years in the desert.
Yeah, same number, 40 years. That's right.
Same number.
40 years and 40 nights. Oh, whoops, wrong song.
Same reason given for why the person who's called cannot lead them to their promised land.
Yeah, and that's not like that's a famous story across all cultures and times and all. That seems somewhat, to me anyway, seems somewhat pretty specific, doesn't it?
Yeah, seems kind of similar to me.
Yeah.
I mean, you be
I
the
get
judge,
suspicious. Well,
but then Moses, he starts dropping laws, and
Oh, great. One of them.
yeah, he's a legalist.
Oh, boy.
So Plato wrote a book called Laws, and he has a lot of things to say about laws in it. And here are some of the things that he says. He talks about laws that require a central religious authority, of
Oh, so he's the culprit.
of a need for pure bloodlines, especially for priests, laws that condemn homosexuality, witchcraft, and magic.
He'd never make it in today's world, would he?
No, he needs to catch up. Laws of inheritance and boundary stones, laws allowing slaves to be taken from foreign peoples only, laws against the need for a king, laws governing involuntary homicide, laws regarding rebellious children, laws against usury, against taking too much fruit from one's fields.
Ooh, he really wouldn't fit in today's world, would he? Ooh.
Nope. And then he also makes it very clear that a country should be divided into 12 tribes. I counted, and the number 12 is mentioned 45 times in laws, all relating to the division of tribes.
Interesting.
And once again, the laws are to come from a god, not men.
Yeah, there we go. There you have it.
And
the dirty dozen.
Yeah. I mean, not that, the idea of 12 tribes was unique to Plato, but
no, it wasn't.
He did talk about it a lot.
But he did talk about it. Yeah, that theme is really big in a lot of the ancient cultures, not just ancient Israel. So,
yeah. And then continuing on with some of Plato's writings in Republic, a very famous one is that he talks about the cave, this allegory of the cave. And in this allegory of the cave, for those who haven't heard it, people who have lived their lives chained in a cave think reality is the shadows they see on the wall. One prisoner breaks free, is astounded by the light, which he comes to understand is the idea of good. He ought to return and help his fellow prisoners break free and lead them to the light, but they will probably not believe him, call him a fool, and might even want to kill him. Plato compares the Athenians to the cave dwellers for killing Socrates.
What's all that sound like? Give us the next slide, please. Yes, these guys.
The Israelites are slaves in Egypt. Moses escapes and talks with Yahweh, gaining truer knowledge. Yahweh tells him to return, free the others, and lead them to the ideal state, described in laws but implicit in Republic. They complain that staying in Egypt would have been better, and Moses fears that they might stone him. So, a decent amount of parallels there. However, I don't know, the idea of like living in darkness and then gaining knowledge and then coming back to those in darkness, I would imagine that that's probably something people have thought up multiple times over history. So,
well, you got the Dead Sea Scrolls, the War of the Sons of Light with the Sons of Darkness theme too. It's more or less always set up as a division of us versus them. But then that's way later than Moses.
And then I just kind of wanted to throw this one in here for fun. Creation and the cave. So while we're talking about the cave, Adam and Eve are ignorant in Eden. They're endowed with knowledge from outside. The serpent entices them to taste something that will propel them out of their walled garden. Their eyes are opened and they can never return to the garden. The knowledge is painful.
That's the Truman Show. Oh, interesting.
Yes. Plato's Cave.
Plato's Cave.
And then I think we're getting pretty close to the end of the parallels. Red Sea.
These Persians are fascinating. This is awesome, man.
So this is from Herodotus, who's known as the father of history, and he's writing maybe 430 BC, sometime in the 400s. So the Persians were besieging Potidaya in the Pellene Peninsula. The waters withdrew, like the tide went out, and it withdrew to an uncharacteristic depth and amount of time. And they were like, you know what, let's take advantage of this. And then they rushed this new route that had opened to get to the peninsula. And but they got about 40% through, and then the waters came rushing back and just demolished them.
They were warned to practice the backstroke, and they didn't. No
Yeah.
kidding. That story's in Herodotus. Wow. How interesting.
Yes.
I've read that. I mean, it's been so long ago that I can't remember it, but what an interesting parallel. Huh.
Yeah. And just for, anybody listening that it's not jumping out to, when the children of Israel are leaving Egypt, Moses parts the Red Sea and they go through the Red Sea, but then the armies of Pharaoh pursue them. But before the Pharaoh and his people can get all the way across, they let the Red Sea go, and then it all crashes back and kills them all.
Yeah, we've seen that happen in the movie, The Ten Commandments.
Yeah,
With Yul Brynner as Pharaoh.
Yeah, unless it's Prince of Egypt, then everybody dies except the Pharaoh survives, and he's just on a rock in the middle of the.
Moshe Raver says the Shadow Cave is Provo, Utah.
Yeah, I think modern parlance calls it the bubble, but
the bubble. I've always loved his humor. A lot of people don't get him, but that's what makes it even better.
So I put this little Latin title, Superbia Legis, and that means like the supremacy of laws. So Deuteronomy says, "And what other nation is so great as to have such righteous decrees and laws as this body of laws I am setting before you today?" And then Thucydides, he's quoting some guy giving a speech in his Peloponnesian War from 400 BC, says, "Our constitution does not copy the laws of neighboring states. We are rather a pattern to others than imitators ourselves."
Yeah, I bet every leader of every nation thought that.
Okay, that's the end of the Greek parallels. So now on to the section that I quite enjoy, which is why do we think that it's Greek to Hebrew and not Hebrew to Greek?
Yeah, why is that? Are you trying to diss the Hebrews?
Why
Actually, this doesn't really diss anybody, though, does it? Or does it? I don't know. What do you think?
No, I would not say so.
The thing that we will learn tonight is much like we've learned about Joseph Smith in the last 50 years, well, within my lifetime, is these people did not live in a vacuum, nor did they operate in a vacuum. So, yeah.
Nope.
There was cultural influx all over the place. So,
speaking of
Greeks, huh?
Speaking of vacuums, really quick, I just have to tell a tiny story about the Hoover Vacuum Company. Apparently, in the 90s, they were trying to do like a promotion, and they said, "You buy a vacuum, and we'll give you a plane ticket so you can go on vacation." But they tried to like set up all these guards to get in the way of people actually utilizing them. Where it's like, well, it has to be to this place and it can only apply on these days. And so it would end up being like so convoluted that you basically couldn't even like use it. But then they had one where they decided to do a push on flights to the US, and a bunch of people bought vacuums, and they thought they were going to be able to pull like the same smoke and mirrors trick, and they could not. People were just like, "I want to go to America." This is in Britain. And it ended up essentially tanking the Hoover Vacuum Company in the 90s.
Really? That's why they disappeared? Oh, how fascinating.
Yeah, speaking of living in a vacuum.
Speaking of, I thought you were going to say, yeah, they offered to sell him a vacuum, and then for a prize, they give him a free vacuum. That would have been much cheaper. That way you have two, one for your left hand, one for your right. You get
dual
it
wielding
across the road and back and forth and across the room. And
So, there's this question of Hebraic Greeks. So like, were there Greeks talking about Hebrews? Because we have writers like Philo, Josephus, Clement, Origen, Eusebius, and they're all insisting that the Greeks borrowed the Bible, borrowed from the Bible. They copied Moses. So they read Plato and they're like, oh, look at all this stuff he took from Moses. And these are kind of later writers,
Yeah,
And when I
they are.
say later, I mean generally after 1 AD. Um, and but Greek writers are often forthcoming with their sources. They'll be like, I got this from so and so. I heard it from this person. I read it in this book. They do not mention Judea or Israel. And this includes
Well, they were obviously biased.
this includes Herodotus. Well, we'll get a little more into Herodotus in a second, who visited Palestine in the 400s.
Huh.
And another thing is that there is just an absolute abundance of Greek iconography and temples and so forth supporting their story. But the Canaanite iconography from these times is all polytheistic and doesn't really include Bible stories.
So, what are we to understand by the meaning of that word iconography? What is iconography, Benny?
That's representations of icons, pictures, symbols that represent an idea,
statues, stuff like that, huh?
Yeah, so like you might have a carving of the sun, and for this particular people, when they do the sun, it means X, Y, and Z, and for this other people, when they do the sun, it means A, B, and C.
Okay.
And like in Egypt, for example, all the gods are associated with an animal. Like you have the falcon and the jackal and the fox and whatever.
And the hippo, don't forget the hippo.
Yeah, and so when you see in Egyptian stuff like a crocodile, a lot of the time that actually is referencing, I think it's Sobek.
Sobek, the god of Pharaoh. Did Joseph Smith get one right? In the book of Abraham. Oh, sorry, wrong subject. Okay, back to the Hebraic Greeks.
So that's iconography, and like you'll find like temples to Athena from like many, many years before Christ. But like temples to Yahweh, you aren't finding a lot of that until later. But not just like that, you'll find like statues of Heracles, for example. But you don't find like statues of Samson.
What? The lost, forgotten hero.
Yeah.
Well, if Alan Reacher was to pose, they could make a statue of Samson and use his body.
Well,
he owes me some money. I'm touting him on my show. I'm telling you.
By now, there's plenty of statues of Samson, but I'm talking about.
You're talking anciently. All right, I'm with you. Right.
Before 400 BC, And then another thing is that the Greek myths are attested by many writers across many centuries in different forms. You get people who are trying to write like lists of names. You get people who are trying to write histories. You get people writing plays, et cetera, et cetera. You have all these different writings where all these Greek myths just pop up. But you don't get that with the Hebrew stories. We'll talk about it, but basically before about 300 BC. And then, as we've talked about, a number of the stories become awkward when attempting to adapt to monotheism, as I called it, monofitting.
Yeah.
So our boy Herodotus, known as the father of history, he's writing around 430 BC. So he talks about Egypt, Arabia, India, Persia, Babylon, Scythia, which is around Ukraine, Assyria, Thracia, Phoenicia, Palestine, the Ammonites, and many more, but he never mentions Israel or Judah.
Really?
So if Israel was such a big player that their sacred texts were influencing all Greek myths and the writings of Plato, it is very unlikely that they would not at least merit a mention.
Well, that's a pretty good point. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, you're right. If the influencer is not mentioned, maybe he didn't exist as the influencer. That's interesting. Yeah. The laws. Yeah,
we see the same thing in Plato's Laws, where he cites the laws of a bunch of different places. He talks about Athens, Sparta, Crete, Persia, and Egypt, and he talks about the divine origins of laws. but he doesn't, once again, he doesn't mention Moses or Israel or Judah.
Oh,
So,
he did. It's just somewhere in code in the Greek or something, It's got to be there. I'm just saying.
so since he's already talking about the laws of all these other different places, it is pretty unlikely that he just would have completely omitted any reference to Moses if he was getting most of his stuff from Moses and the Israelites.
Well, he's dissing Moses because Moses didn't take him out to eat at the corner restaurant, I'm sure.
Yeah. That only works if God didn't bury Moses.
If you're
with
not
his
going to
own
be
hand.
nice to your fellow scholars, then they're going to diss you. Let that be a lesson.
So the Bible does not cite its sources. This is another thing that we know. For example, the flood account in Genesis is by scholarly consensus derivative of the Mesopotamian flood myth from Epic of Gilgamesh 11, and you can find plenty of papers and books talking about the parallels there. And many laws in the Torah are the exact same as those of Hammurabi from 1750 BC and the Hittites from 1550 BC, which, if you go by the biblical dating, both of those predate Moses.
Ooh.
So if you say Moses existed, the Bible, all the dating is true. Both of those still existed before Moses.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So check out this passage from Ecclesiastes 9, 8 through 10. It says, "Let your garments always be white and your head never lack ointment. Enjoy life with the woman whom you love, because that is your portion in life and in the labors in which you toil under the sun." Now, compare this to, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the goddess Siduri, who's the goddess of wine and wisdom, gives a speech to Gilgamesh and says, "Let your clothes be clean, let your head be washed. In water may you bathe. Look down at the little one who holds your hand. Let a wife ever be festive in your lap. This is the lot of humans."
Well, I like how it words it better. Let a wife ever be festive in your lap. Oh, whoops.
Yeah,
Sorry.
but so
1,000 years older than the Bible, though. Yeah, it really is that much older, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's over 1,000 years older than the Bible. And so this is not to say that the writer of Ecclesiastes directly took from the Epic of Gilgamesh, but very possibly whatever Siduri said had been quoted by other people. And so he's probably just taking it from, quotes that were floating around at that time.
Kind of like Joseph Smith did with the New Testament and put it in the Book of Mormon.
Yeah. Okay, so Hecataeus of Abdera, he's writing about 300 BC, and this is the earliest non-Jewish reference to the events of the Pentateuch. Like, to me, this is huge because just anything, it's basically the first reference in history that we really get about Moses.
Okay.
And Josephus quotes him, and Josephus would have been writing almost 400 years later, saying, "The poets and historians make no mention of their law, nor of those men who lead their lives according to it, since it is a holy law and ought not to be published by profane mouths." And when I read this, I'm like, that sounds like an apologetic to explain why the Torah didn't exist before then, that Josephus is making, rather than something that Hecataeus of Abdera actually would have said.
That is interesting.
But I found this paper, and I link to a source there, but some scholars call Hecataeus's On the Jews pseudepigrapha from around 100 BC. And if that is true, then that means that Josephus is not the one doing the apologetics. It's some writer, maybe 170 years before Josephus.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I see your thinking there. All right. Interesting.
So I don't know about that, but that's just kind of what I found about Hecataeus as I was researching. So potentially 300 BC is not the actual first reference to the Pentateuch, but it could have been later. So there's a phrase in scholarship called terminus post quem, and that basically means like the point after which.
Oh, I thought that was the name of my coming up dessert at the end of the
And
dinner. The terminus post quem, sir. Would you like it rare or medium rare?
that's what you can call it in your restaurant. But
I'll have a terminus post quem, please.
there's
That'll
a
blow the waitress's mind. Okay, sorry. Now back to seriousness.
There's a corresponding term, which is terminus ante quem, which means
Right.
the point before which. And so terminus post quem basically means we have an event and we have a date. And the date is here, and we know that the event happened sometime after this date and not before. For example, if you are reading something and it says the Apple iPhone, then you know if the date on there, the year starts with a 1, then it's wrong. Like it's lying to you, because like the Apple iPhone,
if it dates to 100 AD, you have been deceived.
it didn't exist until what, 2007 or 8 or something. So if it's from like 1995, then you know that it is apocryphal. Right. And terminus ante quem is the opposite, where it's like, okay, we have an event and a date, and we know that the event happened sometime before this date.
Okay.
And so, for example, if there's a letter written by your grandpa and your grandpa died in 1999, then you know the letter was written before 1999.
Right.
So we have a ton of Greek writers. For example, Thucydides, Herodotus, Xenophon, Homer, Hesiod, Pindar, Plato, Aristotle, Sappho, Euripides, and really any Greek writer from before about 300 BC makes no mention of Israel or characters from the Bible.
Bunch of biased people anyway.
And so you would just think if the Hebrews had such a big influence that it was like fundamentally founding so many of the Greek myths, then people would at least be dropping like a casual reference here and there.
Right.
Like you wouldn't be able to completely eradicate it from like people's vernacular.
Right. No,
if it was so foundational. But then you get mentions of Israel and Jews, which start to proliferate after 300 BC, and especially during and after the Maccabean period, which is around like 170, 160 BC. So yeah, it's just highly unlikely that the Greek writers would be so indebted to Hebrew literature and never make any allusions to it.
Yeah, they don't even make any allusions to it. Now, we know in antiquity, too, that's a very important point, because we know in antiquity, I mean, even the Aeneid just lavishly and slavishly brings in all kinds of ideas from Homer. We know that. They practiced mimesis. In fact, it was insistent that they do so. Whether it's plot or specific people or an inversion of a situation, whether in war or peace or whatever. So we would find allusions to it. There's no question about that. But you're saying, so mentions of Israel and Jews start to proliferate after 300 BC. Very interesting.
And so that is absolutely not to say that Israel and Judah did not exist before then. It's just saying that they weren't really a big player.
Right.
So one thing that Herodotus does is called gemination, which is where you include multiple versions of the same story. For example, he does it with the foundation of Cyrene and the foundation of Thera. And basically, I think the idea is that Herodotus was like, well, I heard two versions, and who am I to say which one is true? So I'm just going to give you both. Because he's trying to be like rigorous in his historical accounting. And so in the Bible, you get multiple creation stories. You get the genealogy of Adam multiple times. You get interwoven flood stories. Many Abraham stories are multiples. multiple Jacob stories. The manna and quail story happens twice. You get the 10 Commandments twice. Saul dies twice.
And the different deaths of Samson.
Mm.
There are 2 different accounts of Samson's death.
Yeah. And so potentially this is just, floating it out there for consideration. Potentially it's like, was someone imitating Herodotus to look more legit? So just an interesting to think about the presence of geminate stories within the biblical corpus.
Yeah.
And then we do get some context clues from the text itself. So like in Genesis 12:6, it says, at that time, the Canaanites were in the land. And if you go by the traditional authorship, it's Moses. And you're like, what do you mean at that time, Moses? Like the Canaanites currently are in the land as you're writing it. Like,
good point.
It doesn't make sense.
That's interesting, isn't it? That's fun. What do you mean, Moses, at that time? They're here now, you clod. I'll drink to that.
In Genesis 36:31, it says, these were the kings who reigned in Edom before any Israelite king reigned. Wait, what do you mean, Moses, before any Israelite king? There's never been an Israelite king.
No, not in his day, right?
There won't be for,
and that's Genesis 36.
Years.
Yeah. So see, we love to, I shouldn't say we love, but we've been basically taught to assume that Genesis goes back to 2000 BC or before, or even earlier. How interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before. That's interesting.
And then this is a classic one that most people.
Yeah, I've heard this one. Yeah.
When Moses dies in at the very end of Deuteronomy, and Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab, as the Lord had said. He buried him in Moab in the valley opposite Beth Peor. But to this day, no one knows where his grave is. And so,
not even me.
Yeah.
And I'm the one that's dead and buried.
Yeah. And it's like, wait, so Moses died and then he just like stretched his hand out of his unknown tomb and penned this last line, or like, and then of course there's problems with that because you get, because like touching dead things makes you unclean.
Right. Ritually unclean.
Yeah, ritually unclean. Yeah, and so then it's like,
wait, it can make you unclean too. If you've seen any of the dead things Reacher comes up with in his series. Man, when he kills for real. Oh, sorry. I keep bringing up Reacher, don't I? So, that's the latest talk of the town. By the way, let me just interject real quick and say hello to my good friend Mormon News Roundup. He said he's lurking, but making a comment for purely vainglorious reasons. Hey, let us know if you're on tonight after this, Mormon News Roundup. He's a good egg, he is. I like him. Yeah. Okay, back to reality now.
Yeah, so then you get multiple verses in Deuteronomy and Joshua that talk about forged iron, and that's like, oopsie, it's the Bronze Age.
Yeah, right. Exactly right.
But if somebody is writing this in just say 400 or 300 BC, like
they wouldn't know that.
Yeah, they have no clue that in 1300
they didn't have their Mormon News Roundup like we do. So, very interesting. Yeah, that's a great point, actually. No iron. Well, yeah.
And then, on that point, there really is no mention of the Bronze Age collapse, which is...
Oh, hey, and I found that book. Hold on.
Is it the 1177?
Not to put too fine a point on it, but you are a few years off, my dear friend. It was 1177 BC, the year civilization collapsed. This is a great book. This is the revised and updated Eric H. Klein. What a fun read on the collapse of the Bronze Age.
Yeah, I'm actually listening to that right now. I got the revised and updated version.
Yeah, and it's an audio book also. He is really, his YouTube, I think he's got like a 2-hour YouTube program, Eric H. Klein. Go look him up and watch a YouTube video. It is very well done.
Yeah, he reads the book himself, so it's it's kind of fun.
Oh, how cool. Yeah, that would be fun.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and the Bronze Age collapse was just like ginormous, and like multiple civilizations collapsed, and
All at once, yeah, within 100 years, yeah.
yeah, because
That's huge.
there's like a humongous drought, there's like invaders and et cetera, et cetera. And this would be happening around the time of the Book of Judges, and
Mhm.
you just don't hear anything about it.
No.
So I want to talk about Ugarit for a second. So Ugarit was a kingdom on the modern Syrian coast, and it flourished from about 1800 to 1185 BC, when it was destroyed in the Bronze Age collapse. And then in 1928, so less than 100 years ago, it was discovered by some farmer like plowing his field, and the class are like, tongue, what's that? And it's an ancient civilization.
Oh, the work of archaeology, kind of like the Nag Hammadi codices. Some punk kid finds them buried in the sand.
Yeah.
And that's important too. These are 1,000 years older than our Old Testament documents.
Yep.
That's a long time.
Yeah, so we have about 1,500 texts dated to around the 1300s BC. And yeah, just like you said, they are 1,000 years older than the oldest Old Testament documents that we have.
Yeah.
And so Ugaritic is a Northwest Semitic language like Hebrew, so it's pretty close to Hebrew. And actually, about the time of the collapse, so about the time that Ugarit was wiped out, Hebrew would probably be pretty indistinguishable from Ugaritic, because 1200 is about the time when Hebrew starts to develop into its own language.
That's certainly very early Proto-Hebrew at best.
Yeah.
And even their alphabet wouldn't have looked like what we have now with our block alphabet.
No,
not a whole lot anyway.
Well, it was written in cuneiform, so
yeah. There you go. Right,
like Hittite.
So I told you it wasn't like it.
Cuneiform was used to write a ton of different languages. Like Hittite and Luwian are Indo-European languages, and it's crazy. Hittite, once again, about 100 years ago, that's when they were first translating these documents, and the word for water was water. And
no way.
Yeah, and it was some like Czechoslovakian dude or something that translated the first line, and then it just exploded from there. But that's a side note.
All right.
So their main god is Baal, or people often just say Baal. But you also have the high god El, and he's an old man sitting on a throne. They have like a depiction of him. And in the Ugaritic documents, El has 70 children. And Genesis 10 gives 70 nations. It's called the Table of Nations. And Deuteronomy 32:8 says that El Elyon, which means the highest God, God Almighty, divided the nations among the sons of El. And so finding the Ugaritic texts actually made us understand the Bible better, because we have in Genesis the table of 70 nations, and then in Deuteronomy it's like El Elyon divides the nations and gives them to his sons. And so then it's like, oh, well, that makes perfect sense, because he has 70 sons, there's 70 nations, he's giving one nation to each son. So from what I could find, there might be more than this, but this was just my research. There are about like 20 or so gods that are named, and Yahweh is not one of them. Once again, it says there's 70 children, so you're getting like 50 that either are not named,
maybe he just wasn't born yet,
or I couldn't find the name mentioned. But you do get some like Yom.
It's on one of the missing tablets. It'll be found someday, just like the Book of Mormon cities in Mesoamerica. Just be patient.
Keep waiting. Yam is the sea. Mot is death. You see both of those in the Hebrew Bible. Anat is war. Atar is the morning star. Asherah is the great mother. Boom, there you go. You see her in the Hebrew Bible as well. Shapshu is the sun. And then, you get a few others. But here are some things from the the Ugaritic texts. So in Exodus 32:20, this is talking about Moses destroying the golden calf. And it says, he took the calf they had made, he burned it with fire, he ground it till it was fine, he scattered it over the water, and so made the Israelites drink it. And then in the Baal cycle, Anat, who, if you remember, is the goddess of war, seizes the god Mot, which is death. With a sword she cleaves him, with a sieve she scatters him, with fire she burns him, with millstones she grinds him, in the field she sows him, birds eat Mot's remains. And so this is like describing how you destroy a god. And you notice she burns him with fire, she grinds him, and then she scatters him, and then birds eat the remains, whereas Moses has the Israelites eat the remains. But it's like basically the same process. And then in Psalm 68:4, sing to Elohim, chant hymns to his name, extol him who rides the clouds. In the Baal cycle, for 7 years may Baal make drought, for 8 the rider of the clouds. So Baal is called the rider of the clouds in the Ugaritic texts, just like Elohim is called the rider of the clouds in the Hebrew Bible. And then this was another cool one, is Donnell. So I don't know if you've ever heard about this one.
It looks like Daniel.
Yeah, Donnell, not Daniel. So in Ezekiel, in a couple places in chapter 14 and 28, you get some references to Donnell. Even if these 3 men, Noah, Donnell, and Job, were in famine, their righteousness could deliver only themselves and not their families. Or in Ezekiel 28, are you wiser than Donnell? And this is usually actually rendered in Bibles as Daniel, because the translators get to it and they're like, there's not a yod there, there's not a y there, it's just Donnell. But we don't know who Donnell is, so we're just going to write Daniel. But in the Hebrew, it is Donnell. And then when they found the Ugaritic texts, guess what? There's a writing called the Epic of Akhat. And in there is a righteous ruler, one of the main characters named Donnell, and he prays for a son, and Akhat is born. And during the story, Akhat dies, and then there is a missing 3rd tablet, sadly, but it's believed that he gets revived in the missing final tablet due to Donnell's righteousness. And at the time that Ezekiel was writing, Daniel, like Daniel in the lion's den, he would have been a child. And he also is not known for having righteously delivered his family like Noah and Job are. I mean, not that Job like delivers his family, but his righteousness gets him a new family. But, close enough.
You got to keep your priorities straight.
And so the Ezekiel...
I mean, who the Donnell does he think he is?
And so the Ezekiel verse doesn't even make sense to like put Daniel in there, because it's like, it's some kid that nobody has ever heard of. Or, talking to the ruler of Tyre in 28, are you wiser than Donnell? The ruler of Tyre would be like, what? Who are you? If it was about Daniel, the ruler of Tyre would have no clue who it's talking about. But it's actually Donnell, which is we learn about from the Ugaritic myths. So this is just showing how the Bible is indebted to earlier things. Okay, so some numbers. I put this Latin phrase vis populi, a play on vox populi, but vis means like power or force, and you can use it to describe like a number of people. And so this means like the number of the people. So in Exodus, we have 603,550 men, which are counted as 20 years and older, plus women, plus children that leave Egypt. And so you can calculate, okay, maybe 2.5 to 3.5 million people once you're including like all the women and children. So that is what the Bible describes. Archaeology, however, estimates that the population of Egypt during Ramses II which is in the 1200s, would be about 3 to 4 million people. And at that time, Egypt also had a low number of slaves. So this plus the slaughter
Wait,
of
so you're telling us that the historical context of Exodus has a chance?
No, because you'd have to have the entire population of Egypt leave
How
in,
interesting.
in order for the Bible's numbers to be accurate. But then you combine that with the slaughter of the firstborns that happens, and it would have just
Right.
eviscerated Egypt.
Yeah.
But instead,
Yeah, and your last point there is just fabulous. If their pharaoh and army were killed, it would have been that would have made news, man.
yes,
Yeah.
So supposedly Pharaoh and his army chased 3 million people out of Egypt, which is like the entire population of Egypt. They're chasing them. I don't know what they
Just
thought they were
not
like.
gonna happen.
How many people are left in the army at that point?
Yeah, no kidding.
But and then they all get just wiped out. They get killed, and no record of that anywhere, despite the fact that we have pretty dang good records of every single pharaoh from like 3150 BC.
Right. How interesting. And that last point there, too. Look at that. Archaeology estimates that by 1000 BCE, the population of Israel had grown to 50,000. And yet
Yeah.
the Exodus is saying there were 600,000. That's six times more.
600,000 men, 20 years and older.
Oh, yo.
That's why I say about 3 million people are leaving Egypt.
And that's so far beyond the 50,000 people that,
Yeah,
well, William Dever kind of talks about that. I never quite put that together like the way you've done here. That's excellent work on your part.
And also, just think about for a second, 3 million people living in Egypt. How many artifacts did they leave behind? And then you want me to believe that 3 million people went and lived in the Sinai desert for 40 years and left behind nothing.
That's almost logical. But trust me, the apologists, they have answers for you.
They need bigger apologies. So I want to talk about like the history of artifacts that reference Israel or something to do with Israel.
Oh, yeah, this will be cool.
Yeah, so the very earliest we get like anything is in the Amarna tablets, which is about 1350 BC. So this is a bunch of letters written in Akkadian, and Amarna was the old capital of Egypt. Or Egypt had multiple capitals through time, but this was one of the capitals.
Right.
And it references Urushalim, which is in the land of Canaan. So these are most of these are letters from the king of Egypt to his vassals, his mayors in the land of Canaan,
in the surrounding countryside. Yeah,
and some areas around there. And so there are two letters to the mayor Abdi Heba in Urushalim, and additionally in the letters there are mentions of over 10 Canaanite cities or people, but no Israel or Judah show up.
A mere oversight.
But actually, I want to point this out. At this time in the 1300s, the Amarna tablets show us that Egypt was in control of the land of Canaan. And so imagine with me, if you will, 3 million Hebrews leave Egypt, which is the entire population of Egypt, but there's somehow still people in Egypt. And then they go to the Sinai Peninsula for 40 years, which is also Egypt. And then finally they go to the land of Canaan, which is also Egypt.
That makes sense.
Yes. So anyway, roll the clock forward.
Never ever. I mean, it's too bad that beautiful theories get destroyed by ugly facts, isn't it?
Yeah.
Happens all the time.
I weep. But so we hit 1209 BC, and we get the Merneptah stele.
All right. See, I knew there was hope.
And this one is written in Egyptian. It's not Akkadian. This is a big old rock that somebody carved. And it's this king, and he's saying, I just went on this military conquest and I slapped. And one of the things that he says is Israel's seed is laid to waste. Now, this could also potentially be read as Jezreel, which is a land to the north of Israel. But like
I've always heard it called Israel, or seen it referenced to Israel. Is that like a new interpretation or something? Most of them's been of Israel.
No, it's just because they don't have
Just
vowels.
Yeah,
they weren't writing
right.
with vowels, and so
No,
it's
that's
like
right.
you could basically
They
read
still don't thousands of years later.
Yeah, you could read it as Jezreel. And so it is an option. I don't know how much weight to place on that. I think, just give it to him. Say that's Israel, 1209 BC. That's the first time.
Tim Rathbone also has a good point, though. They also left no trash heaps in Sinai, any more than the Nephites left slag heaps from all their metallurgy. Yeah. Now, that's me. That's not Tim. But yeah, actually, if it really was 3 to 4 million people out there in that desert, somehow, somewhere, we would be able to find something, I would think. I don't know.
Well,
I've never been to the Sinai wilderness, so I don't know exactly how big it is or how hard it is to wander around there, but still,
that was back before the church parted ways with the BSA, so they were doing the leave no trace policy.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. So that probably explains it. But Egypt, like I said, Bronze Age collapse. Egypt loses power shortly after this. So who knows if Israel's seed was actually laid to waste, or if Egypt just kind of went up there and rattled some sabers, maybe burned a field or something, and
took credit where credit was not due.
Yeah.
Everybody was being laid to waste in the collapse, according to Klein's book. Yeah, you're right. 1209. That's right. That's then. That it was happening then.
Yeah. So the Mesha Stele, 850 BC. This is written in Moabite.
And
so it's
just
using.
To keep this in context, this is the same era in time. So we're talking 400 years later, 350 to 400 years later. This was when the Homeric epics are basically dated, with the same as the Mesha Stele.
I think that Homeric epics are usually dated more to the 700s.
Are they? Yeah.
Yeah.
I
think
thought
that
they were 8.
Scholarly consensus puts it more like 700 to 750, but I'd have to double check on that.
Interesting. All right.
Around the same time as I just forgot his name, Pindar, maybe. Anyway. So the Mesha Stele, it's written in Moabite, so it's using the same characters as Hebrew would at that time, but Moabite. So the languages are close, but they're different. And he talks about Omri, king of Israel. And this whole thing, I have a slide on it later, but their god was Chemosh, was Chemosh. And they conquered Israel at that time, or I don't know if conquer is the right word. They won some battles against Israel at that time. And if they had kind of kept that momentum, then today, instead of having Jehovah's Witnesses knock on your door, you might have Chemosh's witnesses knocking at your door.
And instead of Hebrew being a sacred language, it would be Moabite.
Yeah. And you wouldn't be able to say, how does Moses make his tea? He brews it. So
hey, that's a good dumb dad joke for my shorts. I'm becoming somewhat popular with those,
Or, I
had almost 200,000 views last month on those. So
nice.
What the heck? They're going great.
Yeah, maybe you would say the what does the scapegoat do to the grass? He mows a bite. I don't know. Okay, anyway.
You have as dumb a jokes as I do. Yours are funny because they're religious. I love it when people take my jokes so blasted serious when I make them. Oh boy, I don't know who laughs harder, them or me.
The Mesha Stele is very possibly the earliest mention of Yahweh.
That's right. That's what it's famed for. Oh, no, see, okay, so that's pretty significant because you're talking 850 BC. But see, according to the biblical chronology, Yahweh was a lot earlier than that known in Israel, wasn't he?
Yeah. So then we have the Tel Dan Stele, about 850 BC in Aramaic. This says, I killed
the famous house of David.
Yeah, I killed Jehoram, son of Ahab, king of Israel. And it also says house of David. This is the earliest reference we have to house of David.
Yeah. And that is still somewhat being argued, but they're getting...
Yeah.
Maybe they're just tired of wrangling. Who knows? I know Deaver has a discussion on it. Maybe they just said, oh, what the heck? We'll give them a point. That's my impression anyway. So
then we have a number of other artifacts that mention Samaria, which was the capital of Israel, Canaan, and kings named in the Old Testament from 800 to 600 BC. But those four are kind of four of the big ones talking about.
Four main ones. How interesting. So not a whole lot then. We've got some scattered hither and yon through both space and time, but nothing overwhelmingly major, indicating an actual long-lasting, long-term big civilization like we do with Egypt or Babylon or Mesopotamia or anything.
Yeah, and I think one of the emphases there is like the size, because like, you get all these battles happening in the Bible where it's like we killed 80 trillion people or whatever, and they just archaeologically, they have no way to support that many people getting killed in
any more than the last battles of the Mormon against what's his head, the Lamanite dude, were millions of people. So
yes, well, I think the last battle of the Nephites specifically counts hundreds of thousands, but the Jaredites has like 2.5 million people that died.
Oh, that is correct. Yes, thank you for the correction. Yeah, but either one is pretty amazing.
Yes. So Shishak.
Yeah. Now we get into facsimile number 2. Oh,
give a dog a bone.
Give a dog a bone.
So in 1 Chronicles 14,
this hypocephalus ain't got no home. Oh, sorry.
In 1 Chronicles 14, we have the Egyptian king Shishak, and he partners with the northern Israelite king, and attacks Judah, Jerusalem in the south.
Oh, yes.
And so about 925 BC, we get a big old stele from Shoshenq the First. And he's talking about his military campaign up in Canaan and those areas. And he talks about a ton of sites of conquest in the north, aka Israel, but the stele doesn't have any talking about like Jerusalem or Judah on it. And so just some of the northern sites: Penuel, Adam, Tirzah, Megiddo, Shunem, Hapharaim, and more. And then it also, sometimes it's hard to say how much weight to put onto the absence of evidence, but no mention of the kings Rehoboam of Judah or Jeroboam of Israel, but it is
considered pretty important in the Hebrew record.
Yeah, it is kind of the opposite picture of what happens in the Bible, because in the Bible, the Israelite king Jeroboam, he partners up with Shishak and then goes and attacks Jerusalem, whereas in the Shoshenq stele, it only talks about the Egyptian king attacking the north, attacking Israel, and not the south in Judah and Jerusalem.
Kind of an interesting anomaly.
Yes. So I have a slide called the Omri omission. The Bible says Omri, the father of Ahab.
Makes you wonder if we had fiction writers anciently, just like we did in Joseph Smith's day of sacred scripture. I'm just asking.
Just have to Just have to speculate. Yeah, so Omri, the Bible, the father of Ahab, became king of Israel, founded Samaria, which was the capital, and did more wicked than any before him. That's what the Bible says. Artifacts actually refer to the house of Omri sometimes instead of Israel. Like the Shalmaneser black obelisk says Jehu, son of Omri. Bible writers were probably from the south and didn't like the Omride dynasty because it was more powerful than them. For a lot of centuries, the south, they were always smaller. Judah, they're always smaller. They're living in the shadow of Israel in the north. And so the Bible really focuses on Ahab's negative, cowardly qualities, but they portray David as a great, courageous king despite his evils. You know, David is from the south. The Mesha Stele, as we talked about 850 BC, attests that they kept palaces for Yahweh worship. And, you know, he attacked the north. But the Bible says Yahweh worship fell off and Jehu reestablished it after killing the Omrides as divine justice.
As divine justice. Ah, yes. God is with us still, brethren.
Yes. So the Bible, they're like, oh yeah, the north sucks. They stopped worshiping Yahweh. The Mesha Stele from 850 BC is like, hey, I went and like sacked this city and I like took all the holy artifacts out of the temple of Yahweh. And the Bible also does not mention Jehu buying his freedom from the Assyrian king, and that's from the Shalmaneser black obelisk, which I believe has the earliest depiction of in a Hebrew.
How interesting.
So
what you're trying to say is this reminds me of William Dever in so many regards, because we've got the story, and yet with the material remains and with the themes of scholarship kind of putting the material remains together with what we have left, especially those inscriptions of whatever kind, the history doesn't meet eye to eye.
No, although I will say there are some things. For example, there was a tunnel that was carved and they found an inscription in the side that talked about like, hey, we dug this tunnel.
Hezekiah's tunnel. Yep.
Yes, except the
that
inscription.
That one's genuine.
Yeah, the inscription does not reference the king.
No, it doesn't.
But, you know, Hezekiah, right. I think it was Hezekiah, builds a tunnel in order to like have a water project, like irrigation. And this tunnel is like, hey, we dug this tunnel for irrigation. And it's from like the 7th century BC, which is the time the Bible puts it. So there definitely are artifacts that confirm some events of the Bible, but there are plenty that are counterfactual.
No. Well, I mean, the famous Lachish letters quote, according to Nibley's analysis, I've read some of the scholarly material. They actually are quoting the prophet Jeremiah. They're not, but they're similar. But the idea of Babylon coming and destroying Jerusalem 600 BC is verifiable from that respect. Maybe not in the nature and manner as depicted, but it actually is an event that occurred.
Well, speaking about the nature and manner that's depicted, so on the Mesha Stele, some of the contents of it, so Chemosh had allowed the Amrite kings to occupy Moab because the people were disobedient to Chemosh. So that's on the Stele. It's like, hey, you know, we got punished because we weren't obedient to Chemosh, and we were punished by having foreign peoples conquer us.
Boy, that sounds familiar.
And then here's a quote from the Stele. And Chemosh said to me, go, take Nebo from Israel. And I went. And, you know, like, does Yahweh ever say anything like that in the Bible? It's all over the place. And then the Stele says that he slaughtered 7,000 men, women, and children for Chemosh. He takes spoils and offers them to Chemosh. Those 4 items are also how Yahweh interacts with Israel in the Bible.
Well, what we need to do is we need to elect different deities, don't we? These cotton picking bloodthirsty guys, they're something else.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's election year, so we'll get it on the ballot. 2 Kings 3, this is confirmatory of events in the Bible, because this is Israel fighting Moab. And it has the Israelites getting defeated by the Moabites, but only because the king Mesha sacrifices his son to Chemosh, which is not mentioned on the Mesha stele. And so, to me, this kind of reads like an apologetic from the Hebrew writers. They're like, wait, if Yahweh was with us, how could we have been defeated by Moab? And they're
Right.
like, well, it's because of the child sacrifice. That's why. So kind of crazy story, because this is a story where not only does child sacrifice work, but it works by doing it to another god.
Those dang pagans got one up on us.
Heathen
schmuck.
So, talking about Asherah a little bit.
No way, not Heavenly Mother. She was banned a long time ago. Don't bring this up.
Have
you not been to church recently?
Yeah, I know about.
Sorry, I'm being serious now.
Stevenson or something, or Renland or something, that was like, don't talk about her. Anyway, so Asherah, there's an inscription from about 700 BC that speaks of Yahweh of Samaria and his Asherah.
Mm-hmm.
And Asherah is, we talked about Ugarit earlier. She is like the mother goddess, basically, from the Ugaritic pantheon. So Asherah was the wife of the god El, and by appending her to Yahweh, who was the son of El, it showed a promotion of the lesser deity to the central. And in the Bible,
wait, are you telling me that Yahweh wasn't always considered the greatest, the almighty creator and all that there was an evolution?
Most certainly not. He was he was just a kid at some point. He had to grow up.
He was just a kid. He was out there playing with his yo-yo just like we all were. Skateboarding and having a good time in the park.
Yeah. Just breaking wind,
Breaking wind. So actually the ancient gods were apparently, now I'm reading into this, married and having kids.
Yeah.
There you go. Joseph Smith's a true prophet. I rest my case. Archaeological evidence. Believe it or not, that is my first fair apologetic paper for our first fair conference. This is the subject. Yeah.
Yeah, and so Asherah shows up in the Bible. In the King James, they actually remove her name and they say like Groves.
Yeah, they did.
But
right.
In better, more modern translations, they just put her name in there, Asherah, because that's what it is.
That's what it is.
And Josiah, he's like, get these Asherah poles out of this temple. It's going to be Yahweh only. And the Bible writers, they really try to cut down on polytheism, which does point to a later date for their composition.
It would, wouldn't it? Mark Smith.
This is one of the big. This is like one of the bestest slides I have on here. So this is
all right. I'll let you be serious with this one, and I will not interject any smart assery unless I am inclined to.
This one is very, very important for understanding the development of Judaism. So Elephantine, this is an island in the Nile at the first cataract of the Nile. And, to the Egyptians, historically, this is a sacred place because it's where the floodwaters come from that, flood the plains that make their land such a breadbasket. Anyway, we have a cache of hundreds of documents from 500 to 400 BC of a Yahwistic, I'll just say Jewish colony on Elephantine, of about the same population as Jerusalem at the time, about 3,000 to 5,000 people. Which I think that's important. It's not like there's like 50 Jewish people living here, and then Jerusalem's like the big center. Like it's like the same size. So these are papyri. They're written in Aramaic, most of them, and they are older than any Old Testament documents by over 100 years. And most of them are letters, but some of them aren't. So in a document dated to 411, they had a temple to Yahweh, and they also worshipped two other gods, one of which was his wife.
Well, obviously, this isn't a proper restoration in Mormonism then, because nobody worships the goddess in Mormonism.
I know.
So these Jews are apostates right there. There's the evidence.
So,
Sorry, I promise no smartassery. I apologize.
So they write a letter to Jerusalem because their temple gets destroyed, probably because Egypt had been taken over by Persians, and then the Egyptians didn't like that, and so they wanted to kick some of that off. And so it probably got destroyed during that, trying to throw off the yoke of the Persians. Anyway, so they write to Jerusalem. They're like, hey, you want to help us rebuild this temple? And Jerusalem writes them back and encourages them to rebuild their temple, but they don't like reference any verses from the Torah. And this is kind of huge because the Torah is like, you should only have one temple at Jerusalem. And then in 419, a letter from Jerusalem talking about a Passover-like festival with no mention or quote of scripture, and even leaving out parts from the Exodus. It just sounds like some priest is just kind of talking off the top of his head. He's like, yeah, here's how you do the festival. And not like they have a sacred book that tells you how to do the festival, and I'm going to quote to you what it says. So in the hundreds of papyri we have, not one person is named Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, or any other major player from the Torah.
And these are Jewish people who wrote this papyri, right?
Yep.
At Elephantine. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Interesting.
There is no...
That's huge.
Yeah, there's no Sabbath observance.
That is really huge. Seriously.
So they had a Sabbath, but it was just like a full moon celebration, like a full moon day.
I'll be darned.
And they work on the Sabbath. It's not like a day of rest. And they have at least one priestess working in the temple. There's in Ostrakhan, a paper was recently published about it, talking about how she was performing a ritual curse for somebody. And so basically all of this together really tells us that either the Torah didn't exist yet, or it had virtually no impact on this community, but also seems to not have a large impact on the Jerusalem community because of the letters from Jerusalem. So this is just an incredibly important find for trying to figure out like the development of the Hebrew scriptures. And of course, we can't get away from talking about Jewish scriptures without talking about Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls. We have about 1,000 documents from 300 BC to 50 AD. And it is the earliest text that we have of the Bible, the earliest in situ text, meaning like found in place. About 40% of it is Hebrew scripture. 30% is Second Temple scripture, like Enoch and Tobit and Jubilees. And 30% are sectarian manuscripts, like the War Scroll. They have, this big old Isaiah scroll, which has over 2,000 differences between it and the Masoretic Isaiah text, including, and some of them are just like spelling differences or like a word here or there, but some of them are like multiple verses. And so it seems that sometime between Elephantine and Qumran, a culture of texts, and very possibly the texts themselves, arose. Just another like point, like terminus post quem. The Enuma Elish is the Babylonian creation myth. The earliest manuscript dates to the 9th century BC. And it depicts the god Marduk creating the universe by doing battle with Tiamat, the primordial goddess of the sea, and it was enacted yearly as a play. And this is reflective of how the Babylonian kings established power through war. Their god creates by doing battle. The Hebrew creation myth depicts Elohim creating the universe through words, his breath moving upon Tehom, the primordial deep waters cognate with Tiamat. The Hebrews were conquered by the Babylonians, and the Genesis 1 is pretty dang close to Enuma Elish. It has many, many parallels. But very interesting, since the Hebrews were conquered, the way that they established their order was through writing and speaking words. And so, the Babylonian creation myth, their god creates the world through battle, which is exactly how the Babylonian kings are establishing their power. Whereas the Hebrews, they didn't have that option available to them. So they took Enuma Elish during the exile and they made an adaptation of it where they had their god creating the world through words, which is exactly what they were doing in this whole biblical project.
So if they're taking words and concepts from the ancient literatures around them, it stands to reason that they would be doing that with the Greek as well.
Yes, especially after 330 BC. But I think
especially after yeah, I wouldn't be far off in saying that, would I?
Yeah, I think I think there's a slide about that. We'll get to it. The Cyrus cylinder. So Cyrus the Great, king of Persia, he conquered the Medes, then the Lydians, and then the Neo-Babylonian Empire and freed the Hebrews. So the Cyrus cylinder from about 539 BC in Babylon, this is him telling about his conquering of Babylon. And he says that Marduk, this Babylonian god, grasped the hand of Cyrus, called him by his name, proclaiming him aloud for the kingship over all of everything. Isaiah 45, 1 and 4 says, "Thus saith Yahweh to his Messiah, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have grasped, to subdue the nations before him. I call you by your name. I give you a title."
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was that close.
It's like,
and he's the only one in the Old Testament called a Messiah.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Oh, cool. That's cool that you color coded that. That's awesome.
Yeah. I went to, I can't remember, like the British Museum website and read they had like 3 different translations of the Cyrus cylinder.
I'll be darned.
But so very likely this Isaiah passage was inspired by what was written about Cyrus in Babylonian. So from the Cyrus cylinder, it says, "Marduk, the great lord, leader of his people, looked happily at the good deeds and steadfast mind of Cyrus and ordered him to march Marduk's to Marduk's own city, Babylon, set him on the road to Babylon, and went alongside him like a friend and companion. Marduk allowed him to enter Babylon without battle or fight, sparing his own city of Babylon from hardship, and delivered Nabonidus, who had not worshipped him, into his hands." And that sounds, exactly like what Yahweh does, because how the Bible portrays it is that he punishes Israel for disobedience with the Assyrians in 722 and Judah for disobedience with the Babylonians in 586. And it's literally the exact same concept, just happening from a different god.
Okay, interesting.
And then, last time we talked about Gideon and how it was a copy of the Leonidas story, except at the very end, it switches it where Gideon prevails, whereas Leonidas dies. So I looked into that a little bit more. And stories of glorious death are common in the ancient world, but almost completely absent from the Old Testament. Saul and Abimelech die ignominiously in battle, for example. The Gideon story copies Leonidas, except Gideon conquers where Leonidas dies. The the Hebrew Bible has a dim view of the afterlife. It's basically like you just kind of sleep, and then maybe, hopefully, you'll get resurrected back onto the earth. For example, in Ecclesiastes 9, verse 10, whatever your hand finds to do, do with your might, for there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to which you are going.
Interesting.
That's kind of like the Hebrew Bible's view of the afterlife. Like, read as much of the Hebrew Bible as you want, and like write down everything you can about heaven. And it's
good luck with that. The nice thing is it'll be a sweet 200-page one-pager essay.
Yeah.
That much.
And throughout the Hebrew Bible, Yahweh's rewards are consistently shown to be earthly. Like Job, he goes through tons and tons of crap, and then at the end, what does he get? He just gets like some more donkeys and some more gold,
more
and boom,
more tons of crap.
Here's new children to replace the old ones, which Yahweh
That's
killed.
quite some loving deity.
It's all just stuff in this life. And the Bible often has an emphasis on shrewdness, solidarity, and childbearing, not as much like warrior machoism. Like Esther, for example, huge story to the Jews. And that's all about like being, because her uncle, Mordecai, like stands up to Haman, and he's like, rah, I'm not going to do it. And that's portrayed as bad. Like, all the Jews are going to get killed for that. And then Esther, she uses like shrewdness, and she is able to resolve the issue,
Yeah.
But then by the time we hit 160 BC, we have Judah Maccabees, Judas Maccabeus. He dies victoriously and nobly in battle.
Yes.
And in this rebellion against the Seleucids. And so really this theming points to a small nation that's been conquered by greater nations trying to preserve their identity and downplay martyrdom.
Yeah. Interesting.
And so I think there's like a good reason why the Gideon story copies Leonidas and then changes it to succeeding.
Yeah. Interesting. Lady Wisdom.
Touch on Lady Wisdom for a second. Biblical wisdom writings have many positive things to say about women and portray wisdom as a woman, like in Proverbs 31, which I mentioned earlier. Of course, there are pejorative comments about women as well, but it is in contrast to other like Egyptian and Sumerian proverbs. And we have this one from Elephantine called The Wisdom of Ahikar. And it has many wisdom sayings which are similar to Proverbs, the wisdom of Sirach, and Babylonian and Persian wisdom, but it is essentially silent on women. Sumerian proverbs often portray women as suspicious or as objects. But Athena, to the Greeks, she is like the embodiment of wisdom. She's the goddess of wisdom. And this word philosophia, the love of wisdom, is generally a post-Plato word in Greek. And you get things like Proverbs 29:3, a child who loves wisdom makes a parent glad.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, when I see this, it seems to me like there's quite possibly some Greek wisdom influence on the Hebrew Bible versus, because like in Elephantine, they didn't have that in their writings, in their wisdom writings.
Quite a contrast, isn't it?
Yeah. So just seems like it very possibly could have come from a Greek influence after 330.
That seems to it certainly seems to point to that direction.
I titled
the opera.
I titled this one Moses of the Opera. Around 200 BC in Alexandria, Egypt, a dude named Ezekiel the Tragedian made a Greek play called Exegoge about the Exodus. And this is, to all knowledge, the first like pop culture portrayal of any biblical material. And as a contrast, the Greek gods and myths all had like many plays for centuries before this.
Yeah.
The Egyptians ended up kind of hating it because it made their gods look weak, and and it kind of inspired some animus toward the Jews because of that. And the Greek Jews, they called Yahweh Yao, and this sounded like the Coptic word for donkey, which is eo, like a donkey braying, like hee haw.
Yeah, interesting.
And the donkey happened to be the animal of the god Seth, who is the god of foreigners. And so the Jews came to be seen as worshiping a donkey god.
Yeah, and we've got archaeological depictions of that.
Yeah, and so one story even has Antiochus Epiphanes the Fourth raiding the Jerusalem temple around 170 BC and finding a donkey idol in the Holy of Holies. And
fascinating.
I don't know that actually happened, or if it's just like people trying to hate on the Jews.
Propaganda. Yeah, it might be.
There's another story that comes from like 200 BC about something similar. Except it's not Antiochus Epiphanes. Interestingly, there is a graffito from Rome, from the Palatine Hill, from about 200 AD, that shows a man worshiping a donkey-headed man on a cross with the text, Alexamenos worships his god. And so, quite possibly, this people knew that like Jews, they just thought like Jews worship the donkey god, and they knew that Christians had come from Jews. And so, anyway, so yeah, that's very interesting, because it's like, once again, the Greek gods were all getting plays and like pop culture about them hundreds of years before, and then this is the very first like pop culture anything we get about the events of the Bible
hundreds of years later.
Yes. And then this is one of the very last slides. Abjad, we have an Abjad. So Abjad is the name for a writing system, kind of like Hebrew or Arabic. And we get Proto-Hebrew that shows up around 1000 BC, which is identical to the Phoenician script. And so at that time, Hebrew and Phoenician would have like sounded pretty close to each other. And so the like Hebrew really solidifies more during like the 700s BC, and we get a decent amount of administrative writing from them. The oldest Bible fragment is a priestly blessing from Numbers from about 600 BC, and it's like on a tiny, I think, a piece of metal.
They found a couple of silver medal strips in Jerusalem dating 600 BC. Is that what you're talking about? I think that's it. Yeah.
I think so. I think there
there was a couple of them. Yeah.
Another one that has like one line from Exodus or something.
I think so. Yeah. I can't remember exactly which one, but yeah, so that proves the Book of Mormon being written on ancient metal plates. I'm just repeating what the apologists say. There you go. Thanks, dude. You proved it true right here. That wasn't even your intent. That's just a side benefit of being on the BYP live show. We prove what we ain't even thinking about.
But you consider the types of writing that existed, especially in Hebrew at the time, and we just don't have any examples of stories or myths or other Bible like Hebrew writings from this period.
That's interesting too, yeah.
And then, considering the development of the alphabet and the language, like the technology didn't exist for a person like Moses or even David to pen parts of the Bible, let alone for it to make it to Greece.
Interesting. Let alone make gold plates. Ooh, textinction. What a word. Did you invent that?
Look at it.
You are going to become world famous. And this is the first time you've used it on my live show. I feel honored.
Absolutely. So this is just to give an example of some of the writings that we are aware of existing, but we know we don't have and probably will never have. Homer, he wrote a comedy called Margites, and Aristotle said, as are the Iliad and Odyssey to our tragedies, so is the Margites to our comedies.
We don't have that, do we?
Nope. I actually have a bonus slide at the end that has the like 3 lines that we have from it. But
that's too bad.
And then the epic cycle. So we have the Iliad and the Odyssey, but what about the Cypria? What about Aethiopus, or the Little Iliad, or the Sack of Troy, or Returns, or Telagony?
I've read them all. I've read them all.
So we know about all of these, but they just didn't make it. The Theban cycle was another big epic about Thebes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oedipeia, the Thebaid, Epigone, and Alcmaeonis are the 4 works from the Theban cycle that we know existed, but we don't have. The 3 great tragedians, Euripides, Sophocles, and Aeschylus. Euripides, we have 18 out of 90 known plays. Sophocles, we have 7 out of 120. And Aeschylus,
he was an ambitious boy, wasn't he, Sophocles?
Yeah.
Wow, yep. That's a lot of writing. He's like Isaac Asimov of antiquity.
And Aeschylus, we have 7 out of 80 plays that have survived to this day.
A lot missing.
And then other writers like Ovid, Aristotle, Socrates, Livy, Julius Caesar, Manetho, Berosus, Apollodorus, and thousands of more works are just known to be lost. And then there are even more that we don't even know that we have lost. So all of these parallels that I've talked about, that is only from stuff that has actually survived to the modern day. There very, very well could be more parallels or better parallels that we're missing just because something didn't survive.
Yeah. Fascinating.
And then this is a bibliography of just like some books you can check out. Argonauts of the Desert by Philip of Weidenbaum. That's the main one that I was using for this.
I was going to say that's one you said you really liked.
Yeah. Then Russell Gamirkin has a few books, Berosus and Genesis, Manetho and Exodus. He has one called Plato and the Creation of the Hebrew Bible, and then one from a couple years ago called Plato's Timaeus in the Biblical Creation Accounts. Jonathan Adler, a little more than a year ago, put out a book called The Origins of Judaism, and that one is very, very cool. It goes through and talks about the material evidence for Judaism. And his conclusion is that materially, from like animal bones and ritual sites and ritual baths and iconography, etc., we don't have any material evidence that Judaism was practiced before 200 BC.
What?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I mean,
wow.
The oldest synagogue
I may have to look into that.
Yeah, it's a cool book. The oldest synagogue that we have ever found is from the 200s BC.
Yeah, I did know that.
Which obviously, for the Book of Mormon, that's a bit of a problem just because it has people.
No, not any more than Second Isaiah is. You just have faith, brethren. Remember, any angel that shows up with a flaming sword is a good angel, no matter what he tells you to do. Oh, wait, that's another story. And then, so of course, much apologetics, so little time. Now, who's this Neil Godfrey guy? Neil Godfrey's blog. Why would you put that as a reference? Is he a biblical scholar?
He is, but also he's where I found out about a number of these things. He'll like review books and review articles.
Oh, nice.
And he talks about a lot of these things. Like he has a whole series reviewing Argonauts of the Desert by Weidenbaum.
I'll go check that out. Yeah.
And
those next two sources are somewhat shady, aren't they? YouTubers, they can't be real, can they? Myth Vision Podcast, isn't that my good buddy Derek Lambert? And
these are the dark paths.
Neil, yeah, he took the dark path.
Yeah.
Use the Force, Neil.
A lot of the stuff that I got here, I originally heard on MythVision and Gnostic Informant.
Yeah, they're fun, aren't they?
And some of it on History Valley with Jacob Berman. So definitely, if you like this, you can find a ton more on those channels.
Oh yeah, you've only scratched the surface, and you've done one heck of a good scratch.
Yeah, I did not put everything from this book in. So this as like I got maybe like half of the parallels in. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's just always a lot more, and more are being. Oh, bonus women. Let's go to the bonus women.
This was just a little.
Haven't women always been bonuses for ancient men?
Yeah. Well, according to the Sumerian proverbs, yeah.
Yeah.
I just did a little numerical analysis during the process of this. So the Book of Mormon has 337 named characters, 6 of which are women, giving 1.7% female. The Hebrew Bible has about 3,070 named characters, with about 170 of which are women, giving 5.5% women. The Book of Mormon names women less than a third as often as the Hebrew Bible. And 2 of the Book of Mormon women are from the Hebrew Bible, even Sarah, and 1 is from the Greek New Testament, Mary. So, only 3 of the women in the Book of Mormon are actually like original to the Book of Mormon.
Wow, how interesting.
But so that's just kind of fun. Like the Book of Mormon has less women in it per capita than the Bible.
And it definitely has less women in it per capita than Joseph Smith had. I'm just saying. That guy got around. I'm just saying.
And then, like I said, just another bonus slide. Here are some things we know about Margites. This is: the fox knows many a wile, but the hedgehog's one trick can beat them all. Basically, you know, the fox is clever, but if the hedgehog curls up into a ball, then the fox can't eat the hedgehog.
Yeah.
And then Plato described Margites as, he knew many things, but he knew them badly.
That's impossible. Plato could not possibly have known me.
And then another writer named Aeschines said Margites was a man who, though fully grown, did not know if his mother or father had given birth to him, and who would not sleep with his wife, saying he was afraid she would give a bad account of him to his mother. And we see echoes in modern characters such as Mr. Bean, Michael Scott, Zoolander, and Dumb and Dumber.
Hey, are you dissing Dumb and Dumber? That was a good movie. That tongue on the frozen pole, I'll never forget that. Boy, that was something else.
I just have one last, this is my very last slide, another bonus. As I was researching some of the Sumerian proverbs, these are some of the ones that I found and kind of liked. Okay. To purchase a dog is within your sights. To purchase a wagon is to be destroyed. Basically, like, you're poor.
Interesting. Yeah, no kidding, right?
If the lion heats the soup, who would say it is no good?
Okay.
A donkey is being used to transport 1 shekel of silver. And that one is because, like, you know, you'd rent a donkey and you probably paid a shekel of silver to rent the donkey. And then you just put a shekel on its back. And yeah. This one, there's a gap, and I just thought it was incredible. Talking about a female dog. The bitch is a fool. Bread is the food ration for her mouth, and a blank is the judge for her anus. And I just want to know so bad what's in the book.
Wisdom from Sumeria.
We'll never know. I wonder if
we could say of that one, but something's missing.
My guess on what it means is the dog will eat without caring whether it will get diarrhea. I think is what that maybe means.
Potentially, yeah, huh?
May the master sleep at your side, and may the mistress slap your face.
Oh, they're Sumerians. They were clever people.
And then this one is just like the Bible. A malicious wife living in a house is the worst of all afflictions.
How interesting. Yeah.
The fox, having urinated into the sea, said, "The depths of the sea are my urine."
Everyone know foxes don't talk.
The fingernail that hurts is clutched in my embrace. My foot that hurts is in my sandal, but who will find my aching heart?
Huh.
And then one last one. One does not marry a 3-year-old wife as a donkey does.
No, but some chose 14-year-old wives, or just shy of 15 years old. So there is that.
Yep.
Wow.
And anyway, that's the presentation.
That's the presentation. Well, I'll tell you what, I feel enlightened like I'll get out. Boy, you have put an enormous amount of work into this, Benny. Fascinating stuff. Very interesting.
Yep.
Fun to keep track of the ancient materials, even though, we kind of have this predilection of our day that there's nothing worth reading from back then, but that may not technically be true. It's fun knowing the ancient history because that's what gives us our context for today. When people hold up the Bible and say, this is the only law which we should live by, you can't help but raise your eyebrows and wonder, has that yokel actually read what's in that Bible? Because if he did, he didn't understand it. And if he didn't, he shouldn't be touting it as the only basis to live, because there's some stuff in it that's very interesting. I'll put it that way. Anyway.
Indeed. Well, I hope everybody liked it. So the basic thesis, once again, is that it seems like there's a ton of Greek influences on the Bible. I mean, the New Testament for sure, but specifically the Old Testament. And the Greeks really, they conquered that whole area around 330 BC. And it just seems like a lot of the Bible was probably put together sometime after that. Probably not too long after that, but sometime after that.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you for all your hard work.
Yeah, though I'm like, this is not to say that none of it existed before. Like I'm
right.
sure that there were pieces that existed, and
we don't have any hard line of demarcation, hard evidence of hard lines of demarcation. So, but yeah, it's about that area. So, all righty. Well, thank you so much for all your hard labor and your willingness to come and share your fantastic research with us. We do have some more shows planned on the canonization of the Bible that we'll get to eventually. We're going to talk about the canonization process here in a little while on the BYP live show. So much more biblical and interesting ancient historical scholarship coming up from the mighty pen and brain of this gentleman here and this other yo-yo. We don't know what he is, but he does have a microphone, so that matters. So,
yeah. And if you're interested, I also have a series of like 7 articles that talks about etymologies in the Book of Abraham and problems there.
Yeah, put that in the comment section also to this video, if you would, please. Yeah. The links to it, and also
we can maybe do a presentation and just slam through those at one point.
Oh, actually, that'd be more fun anyway. Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that also. So, okay, it seems like everybody who stayed here, which was most of them, thank you very much. My audience is awesome. All righty. Thanks for everyone showing up. Appreciate all of you. Let people know that Benny's got a good amount of scholarship here, and there's more to come here in a little while. And we will be back to entertain you more with actually good knowledge and interesting materials and smart aleck asides that the host puts in there every now and then. And in the meantime, remember, be good, do well, have fun, smile a lot. It makes people wonder what you're thinking and what you have done, and make lots of friends, because the world needs friends, and that means be kind. Being kind is better than being rich. Hey, maybe that could be used as an aphorism in 2,000 years from now. We'll see, huh? Hasta la vista, baby.
Thanks, guys.